for everybody that maybe has played in sports or at least has ever thought about being a pros, they've had like a moment of like, hey, will I actually become a pro athlete? And you started your journey again, loving and playing sports. And I guess, did you have a moment where you're like, you know what, maybe I need to go to Plan B here and think about another route other than professional sports?
Probably got to start by saying like I was an idiot growing up because I should have had that moment like all along from the very beginning, but instead it was because I wasn't that good. I wasn't that good at basketball, but I poured everything that I had into it. Every waking moment of the day. If I could, I was at the gym. I was shooting hoops or trying to lift weights or run or do whatever I could to be better at basketball. And so it's kind of funny to answer that question because it wasn't like I was on this journey of truly I was going to be a professional athlete. It was never really in the cards for me. But and I think that's just been sort of the way I've been wired all along was no matter how far-fetched or how impossible it seemed or how much my friends are clowning on me, it was always like, well, I'm going to set that aside and just figure out what can I do, and how can I get there. But yeah, as you alluded to, I don't think there was necessarily a moment per se, but it was at least being wise enough and still kind of an idiot to say, hey, um, maybe like on the small off chance that I don't play for the Bulls one day, to your point, I should have a plan B and I should come up with what's another way in, what's another way, that I can be involved in basketball. But more specifically, what's another way that I can make it to my dream, which at the time was playing for the Chicago Bulls. How can I kind of be on the or in the team photo, even if I'm not wearing the jersey? So
Right. Well, I had a similar kind of, thought where like, you know what, maybe I was a goalkeeper in high school for
mhm.
soccer, and I had the most amount of saves in a single season, and I think I still have it. And I was like, you know what, maybe this is an opportunity. And I looked at my college just to see like what the competition was like, and I think the goalie that year was New Zealand's like backup goalie. I was like, you know what, this isn't, maybe I got to reevaluate. Maybe there's another route here.
I mean, he was the backup though, so you got a chance.
Right. Yeah. 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 Maybe I should have used that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, I bring this up because I think, diving into sports is kind of hard to navigate your career sometimes. And I guess after you realize that, was your plan B getting into strength and conditioning?
Yeah, I mean, it was, and I think that's where I was fortunate is it was late high school, early college, where already I had this realization that, um, that was a real job in the first place because this is, I'm dating myself here, but I graduated high school in 2001, so it's late '90s, early 2000s. Um, it wasn't as prominent then, strength and conditioning, sports performance, all of that. You didn't have the access that you have today with things like Twitter and podcasts and all this different stuff. Going down this path of I knew it was something in basketball, and I think I knew I didn't want to have quote unquote a real job, come to work in a suit every day and kind of in a boardroom or whatever it was at the time. So it was kind of between, do I want to be a basketball coach, or when I kind of found out that actually this is a real job to coach these athletes on lifting weights and conditioning and speed, agility, the whole nine. That was something that really resonated with me because I think probably because I wasn't a very good basketball player and I didn't have a lot of direction growing up. You didn't have, and I'm from a small town, but even in the larger cities back then, it wasn't as prevalent to see youth sport performance facilities. So like, I was just figuring all this stuff out on my own for what did I need to do to get in better shape or get stronger or get faster. And, fast forward years later, you realize like everything I researched and learned and thought I was doing right was completely wrong. Which I think also probably led me down this path of just knowing, from as early as can remember, I poured everything into basketball, but in reality and looking back, you know, I don't know that I got that much better because I wasn't like intentionally working on things. I was working really hard. I was spending a lot of hours, but it was like, to get in shape for the season every year, I was going out and running, 5 miles a day type of thing. And then I'd show up for workouts first day and I'm like, why am
Gassed.
I out of shape, running these suicides and that? Like
Yeah,
it made no sense to me,
right.
So I think a lot of people in our field have that where it's like there's an element of you want to be the sort of coach or the person that you wish you could have had,
Mhm.
when you were growing up. And so I think that's what led me down that path. But then it was still ultimately the pursuit of making that dream come true of getting not just to the NBA but to the Bulls.
Yeah, and we're talking about your career into getting into the strength and conditioning side for the Chicago Bulls. And so before we get into that and your experiences there, I guess let's go over kind of the path that you took or at least some of the experiences you gained to that point. You had this idea of going into strength and conditioning, but I guess like how did you knew you wanted to get into basketball, you knew you wanted to get into sports, but like what was the next step? Like how did you get into it?
Yeah. So me, and this is something that I guess has persisted throughout my career is look at, you know, who are the successful people and like really top of the profession, and in this case for strength and conditioning sport performance. But I think it's true of any career that you want to get into is like, first look at, seek out role models, and they may be people and mentors. And, oftentimes your mentors may be people that you never meet, but I think, and especially nowadays, like we talked about at the top, one thing I didn't have back then was obviously things like Twitter. Nowadays you have things like Twitter, so I can go and look and I can find, who are people I admire in the strength and conditioning profession. And not only can so back then I studied, these people and what were their journeys, but it was more of a like, what's their resume? But it didn't really give you any color into how did they actually think, their philosophy, their thought process necessarily, but it was like, different people in prominent, head NBA strength and conditioning jobs or head, high major. And at the time for me, I was looking at like the blue bloods, like who's the head strength coach at North Carolina and Duke and, all these places, and what have they done?
Mhm.
What were the steps along their journey to ultimately get where they are now, which was for me, that was at the time what I thought, was the destination. And so, something I always talk about is success leaves clues. I think
Mhm.
you can learn a lot by studying the journey, studying the paths of other successful people, who are in those positions you aspire to get to. And then just, trying to reach out to those people, email those people, engage with those people. Nowadays, it's, again, it's Twitter. So, maybe I follow them and I engage with stuff that they're tweeting, or I send, direct messages to them, or, and ideally, be thoughtful with that. Show that maybe you resonated with something that they've shared, or, back then maybe it was a book they wrote where it's like, hey, I read your book and I have, XYZ questions, and, things like that. But that was what led me down that path, was recognizing what were some of the commonalities that had come up across all these people I sort of studied and admired. And then underneath that was having those like local mentors. And I think where it starts is it's not necessarily going to start with, oh, you're going to be mentored by, Mike Boyle or somebody like that. It's, and even for me it was like going to the YMCA and looking around and, you know who are the strongest people in here and what are they doing, and let me like start bugging them and asking them questions, or even, some of the oldest people who are in here, they're 80, 90, and they're still fit and they're still active. Like, let me ask them questions.
Right.
And for me, then it ultimately led to, okay, what's my foot in the door? And for me, it was growing up in a small town was like, maybe I can work in the weight room at my YMCA. And so that for me, that's how I started. And then it was learning from the like fitness director, personal training manager at the YMCA, because at that time in particular, and I would venture to say even now, it's like I everyone I was around knew more than me. You know what I mean? And so I think you also learn that lesson is like there's something that you can learn from everyone, and then along the way, if you take advantage of building those relationships and having these mentors that are pouring into you to help develop you, it's like and then you show I think you kind of show gratitude by like following through. Like if you have a mentor that helps you with something and they suggest you go read something, or they give you a piece of information, to come back and let them know, hey, I read that book and it was really helpful in this way, or what I mean, to show that their investment in you and in that time was valuable. I think people appreciate that, and I think the more you do that, now each relationship you're making is opening a new set of doors. And so that for me was really what it was like, how can I interact and engage with as many people as possible, who know more than me, who are passionate about this space, and just trying to learn from them and get some direction from them.
For sure. And it's like you almost reverse engineered how to get to where you are. I think a common question people, especially in the strength and conditioning realm, will think, okay, how do I start? Where do I go and where do I begin? And it's like, it's almost ironic that you have to think backwards in order to start. You have to be like, okay, where do I want to be and how do I get there? And then you find the people who are doing the thing that you want to do and be like, okay, what did they do? Because they already have a path for you, which is really
Yeah.
great. And, did you started at the YMCA and you eventually went to college in Wisconsin. Was that your first taste of getting into college sports and your realm of like trying to get into professional strength and conditioning?
Yeah, ultimately it was, and it took a while, and actually, and I don't think I've shared this story much, if ever, but my first year of college, so I graduated from Wisconsin, Madison, but my first year of college, I went to a small school in Minnesota called Winona State, and that was part of that whole basketball dream. Like I was going to walk on to the team, had my tryout, and um, I would say nerves got the best of me. I swear I airballed probably more shots than I made that day. So, not the best showing for me. And that was probably the moment where it was like, okay, yeah, it's over for me. But especially once that happened, because at those smaller schools, at least at the time, and Winona was this way, was the athletes trained in the same co-rec as students. So I'd be in there every day, lifting, again, not knowing what the heck I was doing, and I would see the basketball team train, I would see the football team train, volleyball, whoever. And so then I'm like, oh man, I gotta get in with the strength coaches here. And I think I tried multiple avenues, but ultimately they just never had the opportunity to get in there. And then fast forward then to that year, I transferred to Wisconsin, and I knew it was like I have to find a way in, and that was even part of me, transferring to Wisconsin in the first place was, I felt like to get to where I ultimately wanted to go, that was some like I needed to have some exposure to a higher level program. Now, in reflection, I don't know that that's necessarily true. Now as I've been in the field, I think it's more like who are the people you're able to learn from and things like that. But at the time, that's how my mind was working, and so when I got to Wisconsin, it was actually kind of less about, for me at least, the education and the degree program. And in fact, the further I got into it, the more I realized, in my case, and this might not be true for everyone, but in my case, the more I realized that the education that I'm getting here at Wisconsin is not helping me to become, a head NBA strength coach. It was, in at the time, it's, exercise science, exercise physiology, and you realize very little of it is relevant to, especially elite populations, elite athletes. It's basically like, here's a bunch of information of, what is relevant for untrained or moderately trained people, or college students, or whatever. And so I kind of quickly realized, like, I wasn't learning the things that were going to put me in position to go work for the Bulls, or wherever. And so I realized, like, I had to create that on my own. And so again, it was through this process of, studying where people have been, and also, like, what are the things that people are reading, like top people in the field, what are they putting out there, and trying to read those different things. And then, all the while looking what was around me. So the first thing was just like, how can I get involved with, the co-rec at Wisconsin? I kind of lucked into finding out that they were going to launch a, personal training program at the co-rec. It was the first time they'd ever done it. They had a group of 10 people that actually was like all seniors. I think I was a sophomore or junior, maybe I was a junior. But they'd been working at the co-rec for 2 or 3 years. I didn't even work there yet, and I like beat down the fitness director's door of like, not only do you need to hire me, you have to like make an exception to have an 11th person in this, personal training course. And it was to get, your ACE personal training certification, because I thought, like, that's my, like, I gotta start like training people, and I gotta be certified to do it. And here's a path. And fortunately for me, his name is Jeremiah Carl. He ultimately kind of relented and finally was like, if you stop showing up to my office every single day, like, yes, I'll let you in the class. And and I think that was a lot of my journey, though, was like that same stubbornness of, you know, I mean, I barely even played in high school, you know what I mean, for basketball, but still it was like, I'm gonna walk on in college at a small school, transfer to a D1, and then
Make it.
ultimately make it. And I think I had that same stubbornness about, like, you're not just gonna tell me no. Like, I'm gonna keep showing up. I'm gonna keep, finding ways that I can add value for you so that you say yes, and show that appreciation and follow through once you do. And so that was, for me, that was really my first big break. And around that same time, I was able to convince the high school basketball coach in my hometown, Forrest Larson, who was not my coach. He came after I graduated, but I was able to convince him to let me run the strength and conditioning program for all of his basketball players in the off season.
Mm.
And I had no idea what I was doing, but it was those type of opportunities where, it allows you to just kind of be resourceful, figure it out, get the reps, and all along the way, you're kind of building your resume. You're sort of amassing, some professional capital, so to speak. You're learning what you don't know, and that actually led me all along in searching for where have people been. One of the things that kept popping up in my searches was, IMG Academies and International Performance Institute. IPI is the, sport performance piece, or arm of IMG. And I didn't know if they had internships. I didn't know, I didn't even know who to contact. So I emailed like 12 different people that I saw on their directory page. And fortunately, Dave Donatucci, who was the director at the time, actually responded to my email. And we had a few conversations, and somehow he agreed to bring me on for an internship. So that was the first break, where now I'm working with professional athletes, college athletes, but also youth athletes, in the off season. And even that one was kind of crazy because to do that internship, you had to be getting college credit
Mm.
or else IMG wouldn't let you come. When I went to the director of our program, kinesiology program at Wisconsin, I was told no. I was told you can't have college credit for this. Meanwhile, IMG says, well, if you can't get college credit for this, like you can't come. There is no internship. So I went back to the director and I'd written this long letter and basically put together kind of a PowerPoint laying out the reasons why she needed to say yes to me. And I was like, and I even started it off, I was like, okay, we're gonna we're gonna work together to find a solution here because like you are not taking this away from me. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, like I'm not leaving this room until we, come up with a solution. And I talked about the value it could bring to the kinesiology program at Wisconsin, how my next year I'll come back, I'll write a report, I'll, share everything I've learned. And, I think it was really because I wouldn't take that no that she like made an exception and was willing to work with me. But that also sprung board, that was ultimately how I was able to work with the teams at Wisconsin my last year as a student assistant. And that was another one. It was, in the background all along the way, probably for 2 to 3 years. I'd been able to connect with the basketball strength coach at Wisconsin through a buddy who was the student manager. And same thing as I did everything else, I was able to come in, shadow a workout, and then I had this big idea of, okay, at the end of it, I'm gonna make this pitch so that he lets me like be a volunteer or like just come and clean the weight room every day or whatever. Made my pitch like, I'll scrub the toilets, I'll pick up your dry cleaning, I'll, clean the entire weight room, like whatever. And he said no, but he said, if you want to come back and shadow another workout, just let me know. And so in the background of these things that I was doing, like working at the co-rack and then getting, ultimately leading to getting this internship at IMG and even the summer working with the high school basketball players, every few months I was sending him an email and updating him on what I was up to and like, hey, would you mind if I came for another, session? And he'd always say yes. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna come at it from a different angle this time to, volunteer. And there wasn't any internship program at the time. So that was in part why he always said no, because he was like, what would I
Right.
even do with you?
Well,
Um,
before you go forward, I kind of want to just explain what like the IMG Academy. Well, maybe you can
sure.
explain it better, just because usually with strength and conditioning, exercise science majors, what you really want to do is do an internship, so that way you can gain experience. So that way, when you graduate and you have your bachelor's degree, you can go on and say, "Hey, I did these internships, work with these teams." And I guess what is IMG Academy? So for people that don't know, and then you can kind of go into the progress with talking with the basketball coach.
Yeah. So IMG Academies is it's a private training facility for basically every sport: tennis, baseball, softball, basketball, football, the whole gamut. And it's primarily geared around the sports themselves. So there's an academy, there's a baseball academy, a tennis academy, a golf academy, and it's a school for a lot of kids, even going back, which is kind of crazy. But you have like kindergartners, first graders, all the way through high school. That this is where they go to school, and like you have these first graders playing tennis, and actually their like class schedule revolves around them playing and practicing for tennis. And kind of central to it, you have all these other arms. So one of them was IPI, International Performance Institute, which is where each of these sport academies kind of fed into for their athlete development, strength and conditioning, and then of course you have the other arms of mental performance and nutrition. But I mean, all these kids they're housed here, year round, depending on the age. A lot of them, their families will move there, but the older kids, the high school kids, it's almost like a boarding school, and they'll kind of live in dorms, and they have all their meals prepared by chefs and all this sort of stuff. But then a lot of your top professional athletes or college athletes in the off season will come and do their training there. So you have a lot of draft prep, say for the NFL Combine or NBA Combine, things like that. So it gave you a big range of exposure. Like I said, I would go from at one point in the day training kids that were like 8 to maybe 10 years old, and there's like 50 of them, and you're kind of just having to keep order is like the
Right.
main thing. And then later in the day, you're working with NFL offensive linemen. So it gave this incredible range of populations that you're working with, but also training styles and needs and in season, off season, all of that. So
I'm sure that helped you land the job with the basketball coach at Wisconsin. I'm sure that tenacity paid off.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And that was kind of the thing of forging that relationship with him, kind of being relentless, beating his door down. And so then the point at which I got the internship with IMG was the spring of my senior year. And I was a bit slow, so I went 5 years for undergrad. So it was before my fifth year. And when I got it, the first thing I did was I emailed the basketball strength coach, and I said, "Hey, just got this internship at IMG, and would love to, if you're up for it, would love to come in and just pick your brain on what can I do. There's still a couple months before I go down there. What can I do to put myself in the best position to really kind of stand out and maximize that opportunity, and also once I get there." What can I do to make the most of this experience? And so, again, he brought me in, kind of asked all those questions. Then I did the same thing I did every single time at the end was like, hey, by the way, I need to do a practicum to graduate. And I was hoping that, there'd be some way that I could do it with you and with kind of a few profanities, all, in good fun. He was sort of like, Josh, if you leave me that alone, yes, like, yes, we can do it. We'll do it in the fall. And, but it was that persistence that is what, led to me having that, having that opportunity. And even, what was great, again, they didn't have any type of intern program. So they didn't know what to do with me. So literally my first day, I just finished up at IMG over the summer. It's the first day of school, fall classes. And so I come in because, come in at whatever, 3, couple teams are going to be lifting. And so I'm thinking, okay, cool. I'm coming in. I'm, going to observe, get a feel, like whatever. He hands me a card for men's tennis, for women's tennis, and he's like, "Any questions on the movements?" And there's a couple things, just making sure I understood the terminology. But I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." He's like, "All right, I got to go up with basketball. You're gonna run the show." So these kids, like a lot of these kids, there's incoming freshmen, it was their first day training, and they didn't know me. None of the kids knew me. The coaches didn't know me, so women's tennis comes in first. I introduce myself, I, coach them up. Men's tennis comes after that, same thing. And Scott, comes back down afterwards and kind of was like, I really just did that to throw you into the fire, see what you could handle, and, basically sink or swim. You did a great job, so we're gonna have fun this year. And it was basically that was the thing was I'm gonna give you as much a responsibility as you show, you're capable of. And a lot of it, even with in that year working with him, was how can I start to think how he thinks because I'm serving him. It's not my program. So how can I, like, just second nature. I already think what he's thinking. I'm proactive, like maybe setting the next thing up or whatever it is. And again, how can I add value? And so that was, doing that over the course of the year with him and two other coaches and working with most of the teams there. Again, one relationship leads to the next, one door opens, the next set of doors. They were all very close with my mentor with the Bulls, Eric Helland. And because I was able to add value, for them because of the way that I worked. And they set me up with Eric where I mean, it wasn't even an interview. It was, the fact of how highly they spoke of me put me in a position where Eric basically said yes to them before he even talked to me of
Wow.
being able to get in with the Bulls.
Yeah, and that probably set you up. I mean, one had to make you feel great, and just being like pat on the back to me, just be to go through all that and just and basically create your own position is it had to give you a lot of confidence going into the realm of professional sports.
No, yeah, absolutely. But through that, I put myself in a position where a year later, when Mike, who was the assistant, and I knew, it was just a matter of time, he's going to get a head job. So, how do I put myself in the position where when he moves on, similar to like getting the internship, like it's not even a question. There doesn't even need to be an interview process. It's like, hey,
I
Josh is
want you
the
to come.
guy, and fortunately for me, that's how it played out a year later.
And how integral were your mentors with Mike and Eric to build up your repertoire for like designing programming and protocols for some of these pro athletes? Because I'm sure the the learning curve between a collegiate athlete to a pro has to be huge.
I think and the way I look at it, and the more I've been in it, the more you understand every individual that you're training is ultimately n equals one. And the more that you can kind of have that mindset and kind of ground level approach to just get to know who is this person, what are the characteristics of their life, what are the demands of kind of their day to day, whether it's sport or life or whatever. Being a professional athlete is just one of those characteristics. Now it's like something that is much more prominent because we all see, everyone knows this person, and whatever. But it's I think ultimately everything goes to just meeting this person where they are, and the only way that you can do that is truly understanding who they are, where they're at, what they need, what they want, what they feel, all these different type of things. And then from a training perspective, it's all progression and regression. You know what I mean? So it's you kind of have whatever assessment evaluation you might have, which really should take into account the human aspect of it, like the psychology, the emotional, the confidence, the fear, the insecure. Your training actually should take that into account. Is this person like super ADD? Because that might change what exercise you prescribe and things like that. The other thing you learn with, especially working with pro athletes, and because I was fortunate to coach Derrick Rose from his rookie year through to his third season, which was the year he won MVP. And Derrick is one of the best athletes to ever play the game of basketball. He's probably, of course I'm biased. Um, I would say he is, at the point guard position, he's the best athlete to ever play the game of basketball. He's the fastest, basketball player in the history of the game. Um, but and this was something I learned from Eric and especially Al Vermeil, who was my first year. Al was still around in a consultant role, and so he played a big impact on me. And for those that don't know, Al is basically like the Mount Rushmore of strength and conditioning coaches. In fact, he's the only coach who has a Super Bowl ring with the San Francisco 49ers back in the Bill Walsh days, Joe
Oh,
Montana, all those guys. And he also has 6 NBA championships. He's the only one to, have rings in both.
insane.
And so learning from him, learning from Eric, one of the things they would always talk about is like, don't mistake, someone's athleticism or athletic ability for their trainability. They're actually two very different things.
Hmm.
And Derek was a perfect example of that. Derek came to us as a rookie and really had never seen the inside of a weight room. Now he's the most freak, insane, gifted athlete you've ever seen. But and I think people do, they like mistake that. They see someone like that and we're like, oh, we're gonna do all this advanced, like crazy looking training and extreme plyometrics and on and on. You know what Derek needed to do? Body weight squats, elevated, not even regular push-ups, elevated push-ups,
Mm,
with everything with a pause, and everything was kind of body weight, isometrics, combination patterns like a squat to row, so it's assisting his squat pattern. So he's developing that, cables, dumbbells. I mean, with Derrick, we probably didn't touch a bar until his second season with us, and so I think that's maybe for me, the fact that I was able to coach at that level so early in my career and kind of see that and see several guys like that, like Derek, as well as like several guys on the other end of the spectrum, and especially some of your veterans where you saw the the level at which that they were able to train being such a big piece to the longevity of their career. And you saw both sides of it. You also saw all these because I think it's comfortable for us in the field to live in these absolutes of oh, and you would hear it back then. I still hear it a little, not as much, but you say, oh, tall guys shouldn't squat, or tall guys shouldn't Olympic lift, or do this or do that, or basketball players shouldn't do this, or tall guys shouldn't pull from the ground, like, and it's like, well, like, why not? And again, if you take, and that's what we did, that n=1 approach, it depends, and I saw that where, like, actually in my time with the Bulls, um our most proficient Olympic lifter, and probably lifter in general, was Omer Ashik, who was like 7'2" or something like that. I mean, it was insane. He would snatch, from mid shin, he'd snatch 80, 90 kilos, like perfect technique, catch it, and ride it down beyond parallel in a overhead squat. Where if you were doing the FMS with him with that load, you would score at a 3. And then meanwhile we had, and on the other end of the spectrum, I'm not going to call him out, but we had like one player in particular who was, under 6 foot guard, who I would never do any of that stuff with, because he was kind of jacked up in terms of hit, really tight in different areas, and his mobility, and or even like we touched on with Derek, like we weren't doing that, but eventually we got Derek into doing some barbell complexes and stuff like that. And so I think that was the other thing that I learned, is like, throw these sort of, you know, preconceived notions or narratives out the window, and just approach each person as an individual and identify where are they at, what do they need, and how
yeah.
can I help them from where they are to where they're, trying to go.
I think when you said need, I think that's super important. And as I get into rehab as well as training, the individual and what they need is super important. And I like
Hmm.
that you said trainability, because I feel like not a lot of people get into the idea of, you have these super athletes or just people who are really good at what they do, but you give them in the weight room and they have, it's a completely foreign concept. And our
Yeah.
bodies are really, I always say our bodies are really adaptable, and they're amazing, but they're also kind of stupid. Like if you tell it to do one thing over and over again, it's going to get really good at doing that one thing. And so if you
Hmm.
take a guy who's, let's just say a soccer player, they're good at kicking, but then you go kick a football, they still might not even be good at that, because it's a completely different kick, it's a completely
For
different
sure.
ball, and the mechanics are a little bit different. So even something simple as a kick can be completely different, even if it's just a different ball. And I think
Hmm.
that idea, was that the most difficult thing for you to learn, is just trainability with professional athletes? Or maybe what was the most difficult part?
Uh, the most I don't know if it was difficult so much as, like, especially at the time, it was probably but like frustrating in like almost like a comical way, was, especially even as an intern with the Bulls, but then certainly as the assistant. And you got to think, even when I came as an intern, it's like I'd spend all this time at IMG, learn from some of the best coaches you could learn from, and then same thing at Wisconsin, and so I'd learned all these things from like some of the best coaches in the country. And so I'm coming in, and I'm kind of trying to also add value to the program with the Bulls. So I'm like sharing all these ideas. Why don't we do this? What about this? What about, And I remember, like, I would bring up all these different things, or I'd ask Eric all these different, or, Al as well, but Eric in particular, he'd always kind of laugh at me every time, because I'd ask him these very specific questions, like, what would you do with this player in this situation? And, yada, yada, or whatever. And every single time his response, it depends. It depends. And so like I would get to the point, I would ask him these questions. I'm like, alrighty, and you can't say it depends. Now here's my question. And
Right.
he just, well,
It
that
depends.
depends,
Yeah, right.
And so I think that was really where that was kind of my first experience, and you look at whatever the different things are, if you want to look at like Dunning-Kruger effect, or progression of just knowledge throughout your career, and you realize, and you've seen probably all the memes and stuff like that. Like I was definitely very much in that stage where, fortunately for me, I still at least was self-aware enough to have the humility to like realize, as much as I thought I knew, there was probably still a lot more that I needed to know. But like everything was so much more clear for me back then, because it was just like, oh, if that happens, you do this, and that's kind of what I thought. And so I think that was the biggest eye opener and kind of revelation for me, was like, these are, I mean, Eric and Al, and I told you this previously, again, I'm biased, but I would say Eric and Al are, quite possibly the two best to ever do it at the team sport level. And I say that because of also the way in which they always challenge their learning, the way in which they continue to grow, and the mentors they sought out. Like every aspect that impacted a player, any aspect of performance, physical, psychological, rehab, anything, recovery, sleep, whatever, they were going to the source always. They were developing relationships with whoever are like the top two or three experts in the world in this very specific topic. And they'd bring them in for weeks at a time, or, they're having conversations with them. And so, I think that's where I started to learn through them, was all this nuance, all this gray, and starting to get comfortable there, and starting to realize. And I think the analogy I make now is kind of like this concept of thinking in bets. And actually, Annie Duke has a really great book by that title. Annie Duke is she's won World Series of Poker multiple times. I don't know how many, but she's also like one or two PhDs in like behavioral economics, just an
Wow.
incredible expert on the topic. And she talks about, basically life, and it's true of career, it's true of decisions you make in life. Um, it's not, people say, oh, this is chess, not checkers. And she's like, no, no, no. It's poker. Because even in chess, while there's like, I don't know, trillion some moves, there's ultimately a finite number of moves that can happen on the board, whereas poker, it's infinite. And so what she talks about is like, through, it's true to poker, it's true to these other things, is like, the more you learn, the more you're kind of like informing the bets that you're going to make on different decisions. And in this case, it's training decisions, where you're taking in all this different relevant information on the physical side, on the psychological side, emotional, situational, like, where are we in the season, what's going on, things like that. And you're making the basically, you're placing the best bet with the information that you have. And over time, hopefully you're going back and evaluating each of those decisions, and that's going to refine and inform your decision making process going forward. And so I think that's what I kind of inherently learned from Eric and Al, was it was more of this process of, you're probably not going to have like a right or wrong answer necessarily to different training decisions, but it's making the best decision with the information that you have at the time, and constantly refining that. And I think it's interesting, because for me, over time, where a lot of my training decisions started to evolve was actually away from the physiological and more towards the psychological. But part of that was learning, a lot of, especially Robert Sapolsky's work, like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers and Behave, are two of his books that, really I took a lot away from. But you now start to learn, like, man, like there's so much of the psychological that actually drives the physiological, in terms of like stress environment, hormonal responses, and all these type of things. And so it was like the more I started to dive down these kind of rabbit holes as a result of, Eric or Al or whatever giving me these it depends answers, because then they'd like go into 100 different scenarios of how and why it depends and how their decision would change. It was then you flip to that other side of it where, as sure as I was that, like, I knew what I was, I knew what I knew that I was doing, it all of a sudden became, man, I have no idea what I'm doing. The more you learn, the less you know, because all of a sudden you see that kind of larger mountain. You're like, man, I
Yeah.
like
You gotta know
we're
shit.
all just guessing.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Well, I was gonna say, you've been focusing on these soft skills, and it seems like when in profession, for you, the key to your success, or at least managing and trying to learn more, was through learning these soft skills. And you said you started diving into the psychology and these books and whatnot. But did you have the idea of knowing what you were doing at that time, or was it more in retrospect where you look back on your career and you're like, that's what made me successful?
I think a little bit of both. I think in part it was really being fortunate in terms of like who my mentors, were, and also, and I kind of left this piece out as I was talking about Eric and Al. You mentioned, we talked about Mike as being another mentor, and I think that's an interesting point to make. Is like Mike and I, we're the same age. So we were starting kind of at the same level. Interestingly, we started as interns together. It was, his internship officially was that summer. Mine was technically the fall, but I was still coming down 3, 4 days a week. And fast forward that fall, he ended up being hired as the assistant. But we were kind of learning alongside each other. We were in kind of the same stage in our career, and he's been a tremendous mentor to me throughout my career. And I think that's the important thing, is like, I think people sometimes mistake that mentorship, like it always has to be someone sort of above me and beyond me. And I think something that's important to mention is like, networking and having mentors laterally can be just as, if not, more important. So I think it was like being around people like that, and especially, again, Eric, as well as someone like Al, who's like, I don't know if one of my favorite books is The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. And you look at some of the lessons that Bill Walsh shares on like leadership and relationships, and Bill Walsh was one of Al's best friends,
Mm,
and like a huge mentor. So it's like indirectly I was learning from Bill Walsh, through Al, and like people like that, people like Charlie Francis through Al and Eric. And so I think it was like they were already driving the way that I thought and the importance that I placed on, relationships. But it was also like seeing, especially at the pro level in the NBA, the only sort of consequence that a player has if say they don't do, the thing you're asking them to do, is you can fine them. In college, it's kind of, at least at the time, it's like if something's on the schedule, like they have to do it. In pro sports, it's like, they still need to, but what's going to happen is they get fined, which, with the amount of money they're making and what the fine is, it'd be the equivalent of me saying to you, hey, if you don't want to do this workout, like, you got to pay me $5. You'd be like, like, cool, like, here, I could have used this for a coffee. But you know but it's bigger than that. It's kind of the principle of like, you're messing with another grown man's money, and there's still like a principle to that. And so for us, I think that was something I learned quick, was like, we never find guys. And
mm,
it was kind of for that one of like, that could damage the relationship, and it was also in learning from Eric and Al, was like, if we truly have to find a guy, like, we're just not that good at our job. Like, we're not, and there was one player in particular during my time there, a really high draft pick, young guy that he was struggling as he wasn't getting a lot of playing time, and so he's kind of struggling as a lot of these young guys do with their transition, and kind of went through a phase where he just sort of thought everyone was against him, and so he wasn't doing anything for us. And we talked about it, Eric and I, and what we realized was, every day when he came in the building, and how our practice facility was, you got to walk through the weight room from the parking lot to then get to the locker room to change, whatever. So you got to walk right past my office, and Eric's office was like, he would walk right past every day and never say hi. And so it was like the conversation we had was, if we can't even if he doesn't even take the time to say hello to us, then we have no right to train them. And
Mhm.
so to train him. And so what we need to do is, all the training stuff is tertiary at best. We need to form a relationship where, at minimum, when he walks by our office, "What's up, E? What's up, Josh?" And then eventually maybe he even sits down in my office or E's office, and like we sit there and rap and we talk about things. And he was the one that really, I think I learned a lot through coaching him, because then it was like, if and when he did come in the weight room and train, we just kind of let him be. But I'd pop out there and I'd just, be talking life or cracking jokes or whatever, handing him his weights as he went, like not saying anything about training. But then all of a sudden it's like, he's looking around, he's like, "Josh, you got any like ab exercises I can do?" "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I got you. Here's oh man, I like, the next time he's like, "Hey, I really like those ab exercises you gave me. You got something? I want to get a good, pump for my upper body. You got something there?" "Yeah, I got you. I got you." Then it sort of evolves to, he's doing something. You're like, "Hey, like, why don't we work in, you got a push and a pull there. Why don't we work in a split squat with it?" "Oh, yeah, cool. Yeah, that sounds," and so now it's starting to be
You're
this
building that
collaborative
trust.
thing. Yeah. And what we saw with him was, the, I think the moment with him, it was more than any type of like training. It was, we're in the playoffs, out in Boston, and it was between shoot around and a game. Me, Eric, and one of our veteran players were walking to get lunch. He was like a block and a half behind us. He saw us and he screams, "Josh, E, wait up." And he runs down the street because he wants to have lunch with us. And then what that led to was, then that off season, "What do you guys got for him? What?" And he was fully, he, like you said, he had that trust. And I always kind of make the caveat of, and it's probably semantics, but of trust as opposed to buy-in, because buy-in to me is getting them to do whatever I think they need to do, but that presumes that I'm right all the time, and I'm probably not, frankly. Whereas
Mm.
trust is more, to me, forming that partnership and that relationship, so that we can have those discussions. I can maybe influence some of the things, this guy or gal is doing, but they should influence the training decisions just as well. We should be kind of educating each other and working together, and hopefully I'm empowering this other person to,
It
take control of their training.
it's really funny that you said that because, like, when you're talking, I'm like, "Oh, that's the buy-in," and then, like, as you're talking more, I'm like, "No, it's the trust," and then you explain, like, there's a difference, and you're like, "Shit, that's a very important distinction between the 2 because, one has, like, this your ego wrapped into it, and the other is, like, just working towards a common goal and making sure that, both of you are going in the direction that you both wanna go, and I think that's such a great point, and I'm glad that, you were able to do that with the athletes because it seemed like it was successful.
Yeah, yeah. No, and it's, I think it's super interesting. And even just that concept of having trust, I think, what it leads to is, you create an environment where not only, your athlete, client, whoever, not only do they feel involved, they feel empowered, because truly, they're kind of making the choices. They're driving a lot of the training. And the thing I always talked about, especially, during my time at Purdue with our players, was I would always talk to them about, you give me frequency and consistency, I'll give you flexibility and choice. And so, it was also kind of a bit of an earned thing ultimately. But that was, something that I saw in Chicago, and then later in, kind of building the program at Purdue. I think going back to the way in which the psychological can drive, or does drive the physiological, if you're aware of it, is um, by these athletes or whoever it is in front of you that you're working with, feeling as though they have ownership, they have choice, they um, are it's a partnership in making those decisions. They I think it creates the environment where they truly believe in the things that they're doing, and I think there's a lot of power in that, of just that belief. If they believe this thing is going to work for them, then it chances are it probably is, especially if you look at the science of like placebo effect. um, and then also if they believe in it, I think inherently then there's going to be more intent behind that thing, versus if I just get this person to like do something because I said they need to do it. Maybe they do it, but it's more like they go through the motions. There's not the intent there. And I think also the environment, and you could probably speak to this even better than I could, is like thinking of like the biopsychosocial of especially like pain and things like that. It's like if if I don't believe in this thing that I'm doing, and or this athlete doesn't believe in what they're doing, I'm asking them to put a bar on their back and squat and whatever. All of a sudden, they and they have stress about it, and they there's no intent behind it. Oftentimes that's where you find the situations where they say, oh man, like that squatting is messing up my back. It's like, or they perceive pain, or things like that, but then it's like all of a sudden also this pain starts to manifest as being real.
It's a negative feedback loop. And yeah,
Right,
I
right.
definitely see that with even with patients just trying to say like, I'm going to get you to squat, or I'm going to get you to get
Hmm.
back into running. And, one of the things that I help, try to develop trust is educating patients on pain. And, research
Yeah.
suggests just educating on pain is super helpful, and even just managing pain itself without any exercise intervention. And I guess, um, was education a big piece for you? Whether you were in, we didn't mention this before, but after the Bulls, you went on to coach at Purdue, and
Hmm.
was it success? Did you find more successful with education and trying to have those little moments of like reasons why you were doing the things you were doing? Or I guess you can speak to what, where you found success with maybe educating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that was a huge piece of trying to be able to connect to the why, understanding and believing in why we're doing what we're doing, and how it's going to help them, and realizing that you kind of got to get to the root of what do they value, what are their drivers, what motivates them, what are their fears, what are their desires, those type of things. Because I think if you can connect these things to things that they're doing, to it's going to bring them to the kind of things that they want, or the things that are important to them. I think that's where you're able to have success. So and it's finding the time and the place for it. But because it's like if we're coaching, I don't need to like stop before every movement and give a dissertation on what we're doing. Like a lot of times, especially as you're building a relationship, you'll have guys or gals in front of you, and they're like, yeah, Josh, whatever. Like, I don't care. Like, I trust you. Like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
say I
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
to do it. Like, cool, I got you. So it's like definitely pick your spots. But I think a big part of where you're able to build that is, um, by not having, and especially in a position where like I'm a coach, you're an athlete, like there's this like unspoken dynamic or hierarchy that like I'm in charge, and you're like I'm superior, and you follow my orders type of thing. and reframing that where it's like we're on the same level. We're both at the end of the day, and this is true of anything and everything. I'm a human, you're a human. I mean, that's it. Like, I don't care if I'm a coach, whatever. And so I think, you know, something that can be harmful at times is being that like, well, you know, just do as I say because I said so, and like not having the humility to admit that you don't have all the answers and you're not always right. And in particular, when maybe I ask a player to do something or try something new because I believe that it was going to help them, and maybe it backfires, or maybe I was wrong. Being Because you're going to be wrong just as much, if not more, than probably you're right. And being able to come back and admit that, and say, hey, like I was wrong there, and I think those are the things. And being curious, being truly curious, like asking questions of that person, asking, what do you like, what do you hate, what have you done in the past, like Vernon Griffith, who I was talking to not that long ago, I thought, made a great point. It was like, one of the things that we often don't ask is like, what did you do with like the coach or trainer before me that was really good, that you really liked? It's almost like we don't want to hear that. We don't want to
Right.
think that like the person before us might have also been, really, really good. And just kind of learning from them, and I think that's ultimately what it is just making it that kind of two-way street of communication.
Yeah, self-reflection is super tough, and I've done that with patients before too, and just it's almost my barometer of trying to figure out, what their experience with exercise is and physical therapy in general. Because if I have somebody who's had success in the past with a chiropractor or even a physical therapist, it's like, okay, well, what did you do and what did you find successful with them? Because it can give me some insight onto, what they find
Yeah.
valuable and where they can be successful. And I guess, you had mentioned this before with your why, and, you worked with the Bulls and you went on to Purdue and, did great things working with the strength and conditioning, but you kind of shifted gears into helping develop this company called Future. And
hmm
I kind of wanted to hear your words and your why behind this company.
Well, I'll give, kind of ultimately the vision for kind of what we're building and why, and the problem that we're solving for, which is, ultimately when you look at kind of the epidemic that exists in terms of, all these chronic type diseases, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, all these type of things is, alarmingly 80% of us will, you know, one day kind of die, or, have a quality of life significantly altered as a result of one of these chronic type diseases. And when you kind of look at the underlying reasons, these things exist, it's highly preventable. It's ultimately, it's five factors. It's, how we move, how we eat, how we sleep, how we manage our stress. And the fifth one is, kind of largely for older populations, but adherence to medication if they're on, medications. And so, informing future is like, first realizing that we can really control the first four: how we move, how we eat, how we sleep, how we manage our stress. Um, and get out in front of these things. Whereas right now it's very reactive. It's not until the point at which you have diabetes or heart disease or whatever, where now your doctor comes in and ticks a box, and you qualify for all this, care and coverage and specialized treatment, whatever. When in reality, it's like, it's really, it's kind of too late. Like it's not, but it is. But more than that, something should have been done long before it ever got to that point. And so then when you look at it, you realize that 80% of our population, 4 out of 5 people, are not active enough or at all. And wrapped inside of that is 3 out of 4 people are obese or overweight. And so this is
Crazy
where it's
number.
all coming from. And especially in today's day and age, it's not for a lack of resources, available content. I mean, there's amazing brands and coaches and apps and all these things, but yet this problem persists, and in fact is getting worse. Like our trend of people being overweight and obese is actually increased over the last 3 4 5 years. It's not decreasing. It's only getting worse. And so where we kind of started, and really it was Rishi, our CEO, was looking at who is the small subset of people that have solved this problem. Because first, really you want to, when you're trying to solve a problem at a scale of millions of people, you need to first start with like the small subset, like that's
Mhm.
not scalable, and what have they done. And so really where we've looked is professional athletes and billionaires, people who have unlimited resources, and the commonality across both populations is any one of them that gives a crap at all about being healthy, managing their day-to-day health, is overwhelmingly successful.
Mm.
And their solution is the same across the board, across each population, is they outsource it. They outsource actually every aspect of their health. So they have a you know performance coach, personal trainer. They have not just a dietitian, but they actually have a chef who is literally cooking and preparing whatever it is they need to eat whenever they need to eat it, and just setting it down in front of them. Like they don't need to think about, what do I buy from the grocery store? Or how do I prepare this? Or what do it's literally like, here, eat this. Like they don't even have to think about it. And then they have their physical therapist, and they have someone working with them with their, managing their stress, their mental health, and mental performance, and, sleep, recovery, stress, all these things. They actually have this constellation of experts. And so that's what we looked at, is like the missing piece is not the content, the resources, the even necessarily the education to a point, but it's that human connection. It's
Mhm.
having, like, what stands out for, say, these pro athletes is, yeah, the expertise and all that, and they're building a plan, and they're taking the thinking out of it for you, but it's the relationship. It's you know you and we all do. We go through a bunch of shit in life, highs, lows, everything in between. It's having this other person who genuinely gives a crap about you. They care about you. They know you. They have a really truly active interest in your life. And through that relationship, that person is able to really ride the highs and lows of your life with you. And so that's what we looked at with all these things. Most people, 99% of the population, isn't necessarily able to have someone like you or someone like me working with them like 7 days a week, in literally in their life every single day. And so we looked at, well, with technology, why couldn't we build that?
Yeah.
Because now technology has made it possible for us to form connections, form relationships, and never necessarily be physically together. And so that was kind of our, I guess, thesis in building future, is like the way in which we're going to solve this problem is to pair you with a real person, who happens to be an expert, but it's a real person who builds a relationship with you, genuinely cares about you. And what that allows them to do is to understand, in certain times to put an arm around you, and other times to give you a kick in the ass and give you some tough love, which, by the way, you really can't do if you don't have a relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And so that's what, now we've been building for, I guess, about 4 years, is giving that access where you have a real person who's planning out your workouts for you every single day. Whatever you're doing, they're adjusting them. And bigger than that, they're in your life every day. They're not just checking on, like, how's your workout, but they're actually like, how are you, how are your kids, how was that vacation you just took, how is big job or interview coming up, how are you feeling about it. And that's the piece that we believe can change this, some of these alarming trends in terms of, inactivity and obesity and things like that.
And not only people you brought together are just like the Joe Schmoes who go out and get their, NASM personal trainer certificate and they're an accountant full time and they're doing other things in their life. These are some top elite coaches who've done some pretty remarkable things. I mean, some of them I've seen have been on, national teams for sports and coached other
Mhm.
professional athletes. So certainly, you know, was it was it because you wanted these people to be live the successful life in regards to fitness is what ultimately led you to choosing some of these elite coaches?
Um, I think ultimately where we looked at it, and because kind of part of our thesis was like providing you access to the same type of coaching and expertise that typically would be reserved for a professional athlete, Olympic athlete, things like that, and but what we looked at too is like, and I think probably why we largely indexed there, especially to begin with, is right now what future is we're that one to one connection with a performance coach, personal trainer. Ultimately, what we are striving to build is that constellation of experts. So, one day we do actually have, kind of a chef and like meal delivery or meal prep or something like that. We are working with you on mental health and mental performance and physical therapy and even your doctor being part of our platform. But we realize like obviously we can't start there.
Right.
And so the most obvious place for us to start was if we focus on kind of working out and pairing you with this high level expert as a, performance coach, it turns out when you go out and you find those people, it's, they may not be a dietitian, but they know enough about nutrition to be helpful to the average person. They may not be, this uh, psychologists or whatever, but they can help with some basic things around habit formation, and they can help with sleep, and they can help with managing your stress within the scope,
Right.
obviously. And I think that's something that you find when you look at pro athletes is like ultimately it's oftentimes it's their strength coach and or their athletic trainer who is the one that's with them every single day, is the one that's reinforcing some of these habits and stuff like that. And so that's why we kind of started there to build our team with some people that had quite a bit of range and diversity of knowledge individually across all these aspects that impact your health, because truly it's not, and I think we all sort of know this, is it's not working out in and of itself. Like if I work out regularly but I eat at McDonald's every single day, like it's not going to balance out. Or I sleep 3 hours a night. And so yeah, I mean we started there, and then from there I think what that's allowed us to do is building that foundation of some really strong, really well versed coaches across a range of uh, 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 areas that impact your health, has allowed us to now like start to grow our team where we specifically index in certain areas. So it's allowed us to bring on some coaches who actually their biggest strength is more on like the sports psych side or the nutrition side, um, but they're very solid with in terms of training and writing workouts and that. But we have built such a strong team and kind of resource of available mentors and kind of internal curriculum and education where it's like any coach joining our team, like some of that technical element, they're going to learn and they're going to grow massively just by being a part of our team and our company, by everything that we're pouring into them with learning and development. And so over time, what it's allowed us to do is also bring on some people who might be a little younger in their career or a little bit kind of greener, so to speak, but they have the kind of base level knowledge there, but they have that other 51% in terms of like their values, their character, the EQ, their ability to build relationships, ability to connect and support other human beings, um, and we're able to take some chances on people like that because we know that the technical side of it we can teach them, and we can teach them very quickly because we have such a strong resource group of the coaches and kind of diversity of expertise across the board.
And your experiences with, I mean, you basically built what you had in Chicago with the Bulls. I mean, you built this network of people and almost this like this hive of other people who are doing the same shit and are experts in what they're doing. And I think we go back to trainability. I think there's an idea of like learnability too. If there's people willingness to
Yeah,
learn and grow as people, I think that's where you can really be successful and have people who are young thrive and get better. And we talked, you kind of hovered over the idea of like this big think of there's a problem where people aren't getting fit and they're not staying healthy. I guess you think it's just lack of resources? Do you think it's lack of education? I guess in your own words, where do you think like this issue is stemming from in short term?
yeah. Again, and honestly, I think you're seeing it more and more, even just over the course of the last year plus. Is like we've seen this rise of all this, you know, everybody's trying a bunch of different stuff, and that hasn't changed. That's been true always. When you look at, whether it's New Year's resolutions or, I have spring break, I have a wedding coming up, or whatever it is, like this year now, like I'm gonna get into it, I'm gonna stick with it. And yet what we find over and over is people, it's not like people are just sitting around not doing anything. It's like they try, they fail. They try again, they fail again. They try, it works for a little bit, and then they fall off. And I think what you've seen even recently is like there's all these trends of the different hardware companies, which is a different version of what we've seen in the past with like you know whatever it might be, like Nordic Track or the little like Tony Horton, or Bowflex, or I mean, like we've seen it all. Now we're just like putting technology to it, and it's great for a period, but ultimately it's like the same problem is persisting. And also I think a lot of people are turning to even like wearables and gathering all this information about their health and all this, and that's swinging back too, because now it's just like overwhelming them and they don't know what to do with
All
any
this
of this
information.
information, and it's actually not necessarily driving behavior, and so I think it is, and that was the bet that we made, is like it's that human element. It's that, like you know, if I am ride Peloton or whatever, like awesome, that's great.
Do it.
The second like life gets crazy, my routine gets thrown out of whack or whatever it is, and maybe I stop riding for a week, then it's 2 weeks, then it's 3 weeks, then it's 2 months, there's nobody from Peloton like checking in with me and being like, "Hey, Josh, like, how are you? What's going on? Hey, like, I have an idea for, I know like you're going through a big move right now, and so like you don't have a ton of time. I have an idea of like some things that we could still do to keep you on track, or some things we could do to switch it up to still, kind of make it enjoyable to work out." Because that's, I mean, that's the other piece, is like ultimately people aren't going to do things if it's not enjoyable, or if it gets like super boring, or whatever. So it's like having that person who has the expertise to be able to make adjustments, be able to use what you have available to you to say, "Hey, yeah, let's ride Peloton on these 2 days, and like do your Peloton ride, awesome. On these other 2 days, let's do some mobility work on the, and but also to have the expertise and you know to be able to learn, and get to know you, and learn like what you need in different moments. I think, that's the piece. And again, we see it when we look at these two populations. When we look at, athletes, is like these athletes, like, yeah, I mean, there's, certainly self-motivated, people, but ultimately it's like they have this other person or group of people in their corner that are like helping to keep them going, helping to, mix things up for them and things like that. So, I think to me that's what I look at, and I think it's becoming even more and more evident with the advance in technology and all that, just the need for that human connection. But the great thing is, I think technology is also allowing that to be more accessible. But by having that person, by having someone like you or someone like me, again, we can now leverage whether it's Tonal or Peloton, or I like to go in person to Barry's Boot Camp or Soul Cycle or Orange Theory, like, but now I'm traveling, but now I'm sick, but now I didn't sleep well, like, and we can help like adapt the plan and make it fit to your life, as opposed to otherwise, it's typically like I have to fit my life to this thing. Like this group exercise class is at 5 p.m. I must be there at 5 p.m. no matter what happens. Or I have a personal training session in person with someone at, 7 a.m. And like that's when it's happening or not, and so I think that's how the way we're looking at it is using technology to fit this into your life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. Like the amount of times where I think about a new technology coming out and they're like, I got my Fitbit watch, I got my Whoop watch. I'm like, great, but
Yeah,
like just make sure that you're still continuing to exercise. And I think that bet on humans is going to be more and more important as new technology comes out. I think until the day AI can replace a human, I think the human element with exercise is going to be super important. So I love what you guys are doing, but I want to kind of close out with some final questions
sure,
here if you're ready for them.
sure.
So I asked this with everybody, so I'm going to ask you as well. If you had the attention of everyone in the world for 30 seconds, what would you say?
It's so tough, but I think where I would go is um, no dream is too big, and I think it's something where, like I always talk about, is I think even like if people understand your dreams or your ambitions, like you're probably not dreaming big enough. You're probably not, thinking big enough. And I think it's just the way even the world is going right now with technology, with this, convergence of all these accelerating, exponential technologies. Some of what's possible in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years, we can't even fathom it, right now. And so I think that, that's what I would say is just, no dream is too big, and bet on yourself, go for it, don't take no, go get it.
And if it doesn't scare you, it's not big enough, right?
Exactly.
Second question, what are you most excited about next in your professional career? Or maybe just something, maybe there's a hobby that you've just started. What's next for you?
um that's a tough one. I think for me it's kind of a continuation of continuing to hopefully build and grow my platform personally, so that I'm able to really pour into and create opportunity for many, many others. And kind of going back to that, like, no dream is too big, of, also helping and pushing and inspiring, developing other people to see beyond even what maybe they think possible for themselves, and kind of having an impact in that way of creating opportunity for others.
Giving back, and I find that's
Mhm.
a big commonality with a lot of people who hold leadership roles. They're always trying to give back, so I think that's great. And last question, where can more people learn about you or your company if they want to find out more?
Yeah, so check out Future. Our website is future.co, and you can find out, about what we're doing or try it out. You can see all of our coaches and our team, future.co/coaches, to get a feel for the depth and diversity of our team in terms of, all their different backgrounds. And if you are interested to join our team, you can also find our jobs page on our website there as well. And we're actively hiring to grow our coaching team. So definitely look there. For me personally, Really probably, Twitter, Instagram at Bonhotal. I, try to be pretty active there with doing some different threads and, also kind of hosting some discussions similar to this that I'll uh, clip up, the video highlights of talking with different experts in the field and just kind of sharing, sharing their knowledge more broadly.
Well, Josh, thanks. It's been great. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing everything you know, and sharing your story. I think a lot of people are going to be able to reflect and learn a lot from our podcast today. So thanks.
Of course, no, I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me on.
Of course, dude.